The medieval period is one that has fascinated not only me, but countless others for centuries now. The video game industry is no stranger to this fact, and there have been a plethora of strategy titles that allow you to take the reins of a medieval kingdom, wage war, and use diplomacy in order to expand your power and dominion. For many years, Medieval 2 Total War was my go-to fix for knights and castles. However, while that game is superb, Medieval 2 never quite captured that Game of Thrones-like politicking and backstabbing and diplomacy that would have been so integral to being a medieval ruler. When I discovered Paradox Interactive's Crusader Kings 2, it was a revelation. It was a strategy game that focused as much on family drama and scheming as it did on warfare. Turns out I wasn't alone, as Crusader Kings 2 has maintained thousands of concurrent players on Steam until this very day. But the king of medieval strategy games was starting to show its age. Fortunately, an heir was born. Does Paradox's latest offering live up to the majesty and splendour of its predecessor? I'm Strategy Tom, and this is the review of Crusader Kings 3. The premise of Crusader Kings 3 is a bit of an odd one, in so much that there isn't any defined objectives or narratives. You are presented with a choice of two start dates, 876 AD, which marks the beginning of the Viking invasions of England and other parts of Europe, or you may choose 1066, at the beginning of William the Conqueror's expedition to claim the English throne. While both these dates are a little Anglo-centric, you may choose from any noble in the world to play as, and I do mean any. Crusader Kings allows you to select the level at which you enter the medieval nobility. You could choose to play as an emperor in charge of vast swathes of land, or a lowly count in charge of a single province. This is a step up from its predecessor. The base game of Crusader Kings 2 only allowed you to play as European feudal Christian factions, which meant that any faction that had a different religion or government type was locked behind a DLC paywall. Some players were a little apprehensive coming into CK3, thinking that the same restrictions might apply, but thankfully, Paradox seemed to have learnt their lesson from the backlash that such practices rightfully received. When you have chosen your character, you control the head of the family and will try to expand your power and influence as much as you can. As for your goals or objectives, well, that's entirely up to you. There is no way to win a Crusader Kings playthrough per se. You can only hope to achieve the aims that you set for yourself. You may start as a lowly count within a vast empire and try to scheme and backstab your way to making your family the new emperors. Or maybe you might want to take control of the crumbling Byzantine Empire and restore it to its former glory. The choice really is yours. Crusader Kings is as much a role-playing game as it is a strategy game. It's about creating the mightiest dynasties of the medieval world, while at the same time it's about dealing with your troublesome wife, who has just fallen pregnant despite the fact you've been away on campaign for a year. One of the greatest things about CK3 is that there is no pre-programmed story or narrative to the game, yet captivating stories seem to emerge organically with every playthrough. During one of my playthroughs, I was playing as the Count of Messina on the island of Sicily. I was initially a vassal to the Duke of Apulia, who would later go on to form the Kingdom of Sicily. I focused on expanding my economy and amassing enough gold to be able to comfortably afford a couple of men-at-arms companies to supplement my peasant levies, and maybe even a couple of mercenary bands if it was needed. At the start of the game, around half of Sicily begins under the control of 3 separate independent Muslim rulers. I declared a holy war on each of them in turn and ended up controlling almost all of Sicily and the southern tip of Italy. Unfortunately, at this point my ruler was an old man and he dropped dead, his territories being split up between his 2 sons. I was now playing as Count Roger, and I was a bit annoyed that I now only controlled half the territory that I had previously, as my younger brother had inherited a couple of counties. Luckily, my brother was young and unmarried, and most importantly, childless. This meant that if an unfortunate accident should befall my little brother, I would inherit all his lands. A bit of scheming here, a few bribes there, and wouldn't you know it, a terrible hunting accident occurs, and little brother has gone to meet his maker. But I want to ensure that this doesn't happen again when my new count dies, so I take it upon myself to make my count a duke. If he has a duchy title, doesn't matter if my lands are divided between my sons. The eldest will be the new duke, and all the rest will be subservient to him. I control most of Sicily, so I ask the king to bestow upon me the title the Duke of Sicily. But the king says no, he does not want to give up that title, despite the fact that most of the island is under my direct control. I'll remember that slight. But no matter, the Duchy of Calabria is a title that has not yet been created, and I control enough of southern Italy to form it. So I do. I am no longer the Count of Messina. No, I have moved up in the world. I am now the Duke of Messina. That's wrong. No, I have moved up in the world. I am now the Duke of Calabria. As a Duke, I need to make sure the counts under me are behaving, and I schmooze, gift and cajole my vassals into supporting me. All in all, things are going okay, and I'm the king's most powerful vassal. Then, the king makes a fatal error. He decides to invade the Papal States. The Pope excommunicates him. I sit back and watch my liege get his arse kicked by the Pope and his supporters, and I float the idea to His Holiness that maybe it might be better if there was a new king of Sicily. Me, perhaps. He's not overly keen at first, but he does hate the current king, and a decent gift later, and I have papal backing to claim the entire kingdom. I sit back a little more first and let His Holiness continue his war against my liege. Once he is broken and defeated, I cash in my kingdom in the bank briefcase, betraying and overthrowing him, and I am now the new king of Sicily. Now, all of that just developed on its own. There is no pre-programmed script that led me down that path, and if I started a new game with the same character, then an entirely different set of circumstances might occur. This is what makes Crusader Kings 3 so good. The developers didn't create a good story. They created a game that allowed you to tell an amazing and different story every time. So how do you actually play the game? There are many different plates that you need to keep spinning in order to run a successful medieval kingdom. First of all is combat. Combat is one aspect of the Crusader Kings series that I find a bit simplistic. You don't have any direct control over your troops on the battlefield. You simply march your army into the enemy's army and they fight, or you march it to an enemy's castle and they besiege it. There are a variety of factors that contribute to your success or failure on the battlefield, like the terrain or your general skill, but for the most part I have found that the army with the most men wins. The recruitment process has been streamlined from previous titles, and I'm not sure if I like it or not. The Crusader Kings series is not like other strategy games where you build a barracks and click on a unit's picture and wait for them to train. The amount of men you can field depends on how much land and how many vassals you have under your control. The more you control, the more peasants you can levy into your army. In CK2, all of your lords and bannermen would call upon their levies and small armies would appear all over your land. It would then be up to you to gather them all together into a single cohesive unit. CK3 seems to have done away with this, with the player selecting a rally point and all your available soldiers appearing there after a set time. I get why they've done that, to make things simpler, but I think the old way was more immersive and realistic. It also added the extra challenge of having your forces scattered, and you had to come up with ways to get them all together if your nation had already been invaded, or if it was divided in the case of a civil war. But hey, that's just a small thing, and the new way is admittedly much simpler. You can also call upon professional soldiers, called men-at-arms. Men-at-arms companies cost money to create, and will also have a constant cost just to maintain, even when they haven't been called upon. Their cost will increase heavily when they are called up to active duty, so men-at-arms are to be considered a luxury. Crusader Kings 3 has also revamped the way you hire mercenaries. You pay them an upfront cost for 3 years service, and when that time is up, they leave you, unless you choose to renew their contract for another upfront fee. I found this way of dealing with mercenaries so much easier. All in all, I have found Crusader Kings creates this feeling that military campaigns are an expense that you must save up for, as you will likely be running a deficit while at war. Honestly, I do like the way armies are mustered in Crusader Kings, but overall I find combat to be a little simplistic. I have always wondered what it might be like to have a game with the complex diplomacy and storytelling of Crusader Kings, but with the battles of a game like the Total War series. Maybe one day. But unlike most strategy games, it is the diplomacy and the storytelling that is the true strength of Crusader Kings 3. If you are playing as a count, or maybe even a duke, there is a possibility that you directly control all of your lands. But if you wish to expand your power into that of a kingdom or even an empire, then you need to learn to delegate. Every ruler has a domain limit, the amount of territory they can control directly. If you exceed your domain limit, then you start to suffer heavy penalties. So, in order to avoid this, a king will have to give up land to dukes and counts to rule in his name. I find this part of the game one of the most interesting. No other game I have played has really nailed this idea of internal politics, having to maintain a strong grip on the men who serve under you. The loyalty of your dukes and counts can shift for all kinds of reasons. I had one very short playthrough with the Spanish king. I was one of 3 brothers who all held separate territory in northern Spain. I plotted and schemed, and soon both of them were dead, and I controlled one unified kingdom in Spain. Happy days, right? Wrong. My actions had earned me the trait of murderer, and even worse, the trait kinslayer. The dukes and counts of my 2 brothers' kingdoms were not best pleased to have this scumbag who would kill his own family ruling over them, so I was quickly murdered myself. Yeah, I kinda deserved that. If you don't murder your own family, you can use some of them to broker alliances with foreign powers through marriages. Marriages can also be a way to secure the loyalties of some of your more troublesome vassals. If you have a powerful duke who is thinking that maybe he and his family might be better rulers than you, then why not make his family your family? A quick marriage later, and the man who was a potential rival becomes a trusted friend. This level of depth into politics and diplomacy in the medieval world makes every other strategy game look amateurish in comparison. It's always just raise an army, fight the enemy, take their lands, job done. Crusader Kings is more than just a map painting exercise. The way that you have to delve deep and deal with the characters and their thoughts, personalities and desires is superb and is the real selling point of the game. That being said, if you've never played this game or any other Paradox game before, be warned, there is a steep learning curve. You will have a few playthroughs where you will be looking on, confused, as the kingdom you just built crumbles around you with no clue as to why. But give it a good few hours, and maybe you'll be something of an expert at this game, just like me, who looks on at the kingdom that I have just built and watches it crumble around me. But at least I have some idea as to why it happened, so go me, I guess. CK3 has done a great job of updating the look from previous games, while still keeping the level of detail that was present. Graphically, the maps look amazing, with fluid changes of design depending on how zoomed in or out you are at any given moment. It helps to show a detailed overview when close up, and when the map is zoomed out, you are given a beautiful tabletop map, clearly colour coded to show the different realms across the world. The music is time appropriate and well made while not being overly obtrusive, and other sound effects are also pretty good. The battle animations I found to be a bit simplistic, and they even seem to be a considerable step down from the animations that were present in Paradox's previous offering, Imperator Rome. That being said, this is the only instance where I can say that Imperator tops CK3. The UI is mostly good. There are a few annoying things, like when you need to hover over tooltips for a second or two before they lock into place, otherwise they just disappear whenever you try to click on anything. Apparently there's a setting in the options menu to turn this off, but I think the devs need to make that standard. Given the sheer level of detail in CK3, the menus are fairly easy to navigate, and this is a game that could easily get lost inside a myriad of menus upon menus, but the UI is intuitive and it didn't take long for me to get a grip of it. I think your character's avatars are one of the more noticeable improvements from previous Paradox titles. Rather than a simple character portrait, we now get fully animated avatars. Their appearance will change over time with age and lifestyle. They can become battle-scarred, poxmarked, gain weight or become malnourished amongst many others. They really are one of those cool additions that aren't necessary to the game, but give it that layer of polish that all great games need. There's not a whole lot to say on the presentation of CK3. They've done a great job putting together a well-polished game that looks and sounds fantastic. Crusader Kings 3 is an excellent game, and is very much a worthy successor to its predecessor, and in many ways it surpasses it. There's so much depth and detail that's been lovingly crafted into this title, and there's plenty that I haven't discussed for you to go and explore. I'm sure in the coming months and years, with the updates, patches and DLC, the game will only continue to grow and improve. So let's break this down. The premise. Pros. Intriguing Machiavellian stories that develop organically over every playthrough. A huge variety of characters and factions. The cons. Some people may not like the lack of a scripted narrative or objectives. Gameplay. The pros. The diplomacy elements are some of the best I've ever seen in a strategy game. And strong RPG elements with some incredibly interesting and sometimes hilarious character moments. The cons. Combat is a little simplistic at times. Presentation. The pros. An excellent and intuitive UI. And the maps are detailed, yet simple. The cons. Battlefield animations are poor. And the level of detail can be overwhelming to new players. So, if you were ever looking for a game that lets you live out the ultimate Machiavellian fantasy, a game that is more than a simple map painting exercise, more than fighting battle after battle until you ultimately win, and somehow Crusader Kings 2 passed you by? Well then, do I have the game for you. If you were a big Crusader Kings 2 fan, and you were apprehensive at whether or not Paradox could create a sequel worthy of CK2's legacy, well, I am happy to tell you that they absolutely did, and I'm very happy to give Crusader Kings 3 a 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. What did you think of Crusader Kings 3? Do you agree with me? Is it a worthy successor, or will you be sticking with Crusader Kings 2? Tell me what you thought, and tell me why. Sound off in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm Strategy Tom, and I'll see you next time.